One topic that I've consistently avoided on this channel is the culture war. The reasons for this are numerous. Everyone talks about it, I find it uninteresting, I find that most people who partake in it on every side to be obnoxious, self-righteous, and hypocritical, and more than anything, I don't think it's nearly as important as other people do. The specific controversies within the culture war are fleeting. As I write this video, the latest flare-up is that a mall Santa told a kid he wouldn't bring him a Nerf gun. By the time I finally record, edit, and post this video, I'm willing to bet that our ADD culture will have moved on to yet another skirmish. Over the course of writing this video, I've actually had to change that reference several times. Granted, I can be a slow writer, but I'm not that slow. These specific instances are mostly just juicy content fodder for a certain brand of creator. I am not of that brand, I don't particularly care for that brand, and you will likely never see me make videos on these subjects. These tedious little episodes in aggregate, however, do point to very real differences in values, customs, and priorities within our population. And today, I want to take a sort of 30,000-foot view of it. I want to talk to you about why conservatives are so engaged in the culture war, and what it has to do with our lame duck president. Conservatives are adamant that the left controls the culture.
I mean, look, we live in a culturally left-wing country. There's just no, I can't go on Hulu without, like, you know, some LGBTQ lawmaker category. I'm not saying that's bad, but, like, it's just right there. It's, like, shoved in your face. And it's there everywhere. You can't walk around in any major city in America without, like, culturally left-wing propaganda. I have an RBG. My own neighborhood has, like, all these signs of RBG. And these are sponsored by the city. It's just there. And
this is absolutely true, by the way. If you're on the left and you don't recognize this, it's probably for the same reason that a fish doesn't recognize it's in water. A lot of lefties I run into online aren't engaged in the culture war because they seem to think it's a distraction.
This is all a distraction, guys. The culture war is all a distraction. They try to get people outraged about menial nonsense bullshit. And, you know, they try to make it seem like the left is coming for everything that you happen to like in your life. Every little nicety, every little personal thing. But that's not true. And this is just a giant distraction from the fact that these guys really don't have any solutions or answers on the serious issues.
Most people on the right, at least in my experience, don't see things the same way. They don't like that the left dominates the mainstream media, the universities, and the entertainment industry, which it certainly does. Left-wing culture is even important in corporate America. I'll elaborate more on this in a future video. But for now, I think it's suffice to say that corporations love to virtue signal by appealing to left-wing cultural sensibilities. Many people think that this is just a cynical ploy to gain further profits, and there's probably some truth in that. It might also have something to do with the fact that almost all the upper crust at your average Fortune 500 company is educated at Ivy League schools or top public universities, which are the wokest of the woke. It's also true that certain industries tend to crop up in parts of the country that are left-wing. Silicon Valley is an excellent example of this. Now, does this matter? I'd say it indisputably does, at least for now. As our culture becomes more and more fractured, that may well change. But to what extent does it matter? Well, that depends on who you ask. Some people would have you believe that woke, left-wing nonsense is a surreptitious cultural Marxist agenda. These people aren't referring to, say, openly Marxist economics professors like Richard Wolff. No, they're talking about bedroom feminists and the obnoxious rags like BuzzFeed where they get their news. These are the Trojan horses paving the way for the Richard Wolffs of the world. This, conveniently enough, means that critics of BuzzFeed and the like are brave warriors against Marxism, fighting in the vanguard for Western civilization, standing up for the noble principles upon which it is built, like free speech and free markets, all by pwning bedroom feminists. The brave keyboard warriors are the only thing standing between us and the next Bolshevik revolution. We are truly in their debt. I'm being sarcastic, of course. I think that a lot of people exaggerate the stakes of the culture war out of a sense of self-importance. That's not to say that it doesn't matter, though. There are people who have had their lives ruined by trespassing upon cultural taboos, and I don't mean to trivialize their plight. I just don't think they're victims of some surreptitious Marxist agenda. Most Marxists I run into are pretty open and unapologetic about what they stand for. Of course, there will always be cultural standards regardless of who's in charge, and there will always be penalties for breaking those standards. This is why, as I've said repeatedly on this channel, the people who push back against woke culture with absolutist rhetoric are unhelpful at best. The fact of the matter is, there are always going to be informal rules in place that attempt to shape our behavior. and that breaking those rules is going to come at a cost. And I think this has a lot to do with the right's focus on the culture war. They feel as though they're playing by somebody else's rules, and that these rules have been unfairly applied at their expense. In other words, the right feels as though the left's hold on the culture is illegitimate. As Malcolm Gladwell wrote in his book David and Goliath, legitimacy is based on three things. First of all, the people who are asked to obey authority have to feel like they have a voice, that if they speak up, they will be heard. Second, the law has to be predictable. There has to be a reasonable expectation that the rules tomorrow are going to be roughly the same as the rules today. And third, the authority has to be fair. It can't treat one group differently from another. While Gladwell is talking about actual laws, I believe that his formula of legitimacy holds for informal standards as well. A lot of people on the right feel as though the left breaks all these standards when it comes to cultural norms at their expense. They think that the left establishes rules and that they have absolutely no input. In fact, they face retribution merely for questioning them. They believe that these rules can change so quickly and arbitrarily as to be impossible to keep up with. Finally, the right believes that they are unfairly treated under these rules. They face consequences for infractions that leftists in good standing simply don't. Now, let me be very clear here. I am not making value judgments. The point of this video is not to argue for or against any particular cultural standard. I am not attempting to validate anyone's perspective. I simply want to explain it. Nor am I attempting to justify anyone's behavior, words, or choices here. If you don't know my position on any particular cultural issue, by all means ask. But please do not simply assume that I'm necessarily sympathetic to someone's sensibilities on these issues, simply because I'm trying to explain them. Nor am I attempting to be exhaustive here. I am under no illusions that this video is somehow a comprehensive account of why the right wing wages culture war and why they embrace Trump. With that said, let's apply Gladwell's formula of legitimacy to the culture wars. Number 1. Those subjected to the rules have to have a voice. Like I said earlier, the left dominates academia, entertainment, and the media. I'm not saying that everyone in these institutions is a card-carrying member of Antifa, though an alarming number of college professors are quite sympathetic to it. It's just that your average person within these institutions has politics that are left of center, and homogeneously so. A lot of people within these institutions simply take their assumptions for granted, and believe them to be so obvious that only a bigot or someone with a nefarious agenda would ever question them. An excellent example of this is when Joe Rogan had the controversial author Abigail Shrier on his show. Shrier wrote the book Irreversible Damage, The Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters. Given the title, the reason this book is controversial should be self-explanatory. As Philip Ellis wrote in Men's Health, Shrier invalidated the lived experience of trans and non-binary kids and teens, and made numerous, dangerous, entirely unsound false equivalencies. She compared transitioning among teenagers to historic adolescent phenomena such as eating disorders, self-harm, and, bafflingly, the occult, calling this age group the same population that gets involved in cutting, demonic possession, witchcraft, anorexia, and bulimia. Joe Rogan responded by saying, "There's a thought process now that if you're talking at all about trans people, you have to be 100% supportive. You can never question whether or not children should be allowed to transition. All this is madness. I'm not in any way anti-trans. I am 100% for people being able to do whatever they want, as long as it doesn't harm other people," he said. Joe Rogan is not right-wing, but his views on trans issues are not perfectly in line with the leftist orthodoxy on this particular issue. I have no idea what Abigail Shrier's politics are, but she is speaking to the concerns that many cultural conservatives do have concerning trans issues. Many conservatives are uncomfortable with the way things are trending, but they are even more anxious about the fact that it's becoming taboo to even talk about it in a way that's not totally positive. They feel as though they can't voice their concerns, that the powers that be have already decided how things are going to work. They not only feel as though they haven't been consulted, they feel as though even trying to be heard will land them in a world of trouble. Gladwell's second rule: the law has to be predictable. This one may be more pronounced than any. The rules of what is acceptable, particularly in terms of language, are changing so quickly, and sometimes, it seems anyways, arbitrarily. Even people who are on the left themselves, who are sympathetic to leftist cultural ideals, have caught flack for using slightly outmoded language. I remember this happening during the 2016 Democratic primary with the Black Lives Matter movement. Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, and Martin O'Malley were all asked the question, do Black Lives Matter?
Every life matters, and that is why this issue is so important. Black lives matter, white lives matter, all lives matter. Black lives matter, white lives matter.
Remember, these are all politicians, people who typically attempt to calibrate their speech in such a way to have broad appeal, and they were also desperately trying to court black Americans to vote for them. And even they weren't in the know on the right thing to say when asked this question. The most recent example of rules changing too quickly was when Senator Mazie Hirono was questioning Amy Coney Barrett during her Senate confirmation hearings for the Supreme Court. Hirono criticized Coney Barrett for using the term sexual preference in 2017, claiming that the term was objectionable and that by using it, Coney Barrett was deliberately trying to malign people within the LGBT community.
Not once, but twice, you use the term sexual preference to describe those in the LGBTQ community. And let me make clear, sexual preference is an offensive and outdated term. It is used by anti-LGBTQ activists to suggest that sexual orientation is a choice. It is not. Sexual orientation is a key part of a person's identity. That sexual orientation is both a normal expression of human sexuality and immutable was a key part of the majority's opinion in Obergefell, which, by the way, Scalia did not agree with. So if it is your view that sexual orientation is merely a preference, as you noted, then the LGBTQ community should be rightly concerned whether you would uphold their constitutional right to marry. I don't think that you use the term sexual preference as just, I don't think it was an accident.
I've been sympathetic to the LGBT community my entire adult life. I've always considered myself a supporter of expanding their rights, and I've always used the term sexual preference. I never got the memo that it was offensive. I've heard many people on the left say the exact same thing in response to this.
Yeah, I've heard so many people, I've used it, other people have used it, sexual preference, yeah. That's not, nobody ever thought about that as offensive. Now, if you want to claim it's offensive, don't be surprised when people are like roll their eyes. Because you can't just change it every 2 or 3 years. It's like, now you can't say this, now you can't say this, now you can't say this. There's gonna be a backlash to that, and it's not only gonna be from conservatives.
Amy Coney Barrett actually apologized, which is telling. Coney Barrett is a conservative Catholic. I'm guessing she's probably against gay marriage and a number of other issues that affect the LGBT community. Even someone with conservative Christian values doesn't want to be deliberately offensive, disrespectful, and mean to people just for the sake of it. Most people, I think, are like that. If nothing else, they'd rather go along to get along. But it's hard to do that when the ground is constantly shifting beneath your feet. This instance is also an excellent example of a violation of Gladwell's third rule of legitimacy. The rules have to be equally applied. Conservatives constantly complain about left-wing hypocrisy, that people on the left get a pass for their indiscretions, whereas conservatives, at best, have to walk on eggshells, or, at worst, are the victims of opportunistic woke baiting. The latter was almost certainly the case with Hirono chastising Coney Barrett. Here's a compilation of Democrats and liberal figures recently using the term sexual preference.
You use the term sexual preference to describe those in the LGBTQ community. And let me make clear, sexual preference is an offensive and outdated term.
But this time bring everybody along, regardless of color, sexual preference.
Based on whatever color, what their sexual preference might be.
By race, by age, by sexual preference.
It doesn't matter what your sexual preference is.
What their sexual preference is.
Never in the course of her military career had anything about her sexual preference had any impact.
Based upon race, color, or preference or sexual preference.
I don't think that you use the term sexual preference as just, I don't think it was an accident.
Our society has come to respect people, whatever their sexual preference.
I don't remember any of these people catching flack for this. Hirono was almost certainly doing this to try and delegitimize Coney Barrett. So conservatives feel as though they don't have input in the culture, and that these rules are changed and enforced capriciously. But what does that have to do with Donald Trump? Well, you know how I bash Jank for insisting that Democrats just need to fight?
Fight, fighter, fight for...
And that by fight, he just means that they need to use inflammatory rhetoric in front of the right audience? Well, something similar exists on the right, too. A lot of conservatives think that elected Republicans are weak, and that they lose because they don't fight hard enough. In 2012, Mitt Romney spent a lot of time going after Barack Obama's record, but he was very reluctant to go after the president personally. Barack Obama was underwater with his approval rating, but was personally liked, so Mitt Romney would consistently couch his criticisms in statements about how President Obama was a nice guy.
I think he's a nice person. I just don't think we can afford him any longer.
This did not go over well with the conservative base.
And somehow he is a nice guy. I hate hearing this from Mitt Romney. He's got to get this talking point out of his mouth. Barack Obama is not a nice guy. He has dealt brutally with the right, with people like Paul Ryan and brave Republicans who have been calling him to the carpet on all of the disgusting culture of corruption that has reigned.
Many people still in part blame Romney's rhetoric for his 2012 loss. I've also heard Trump supporters criticize George W. Bush for not fighting hard enough. This is an odd criticism, given that, unlike Trump, George W. Bush actually won his re-election bid. But there it is. During the 2012 Republican primary, Newt Gingrich's flailing campaign was rejuvenated by his attack on Juan Williams during one of the debates.
The suggestion that you made was about a lack of work ethic. And I got to tell you, my email account, my Twitter account has been inundated with people of all races who are asking if your comments are not intended to belittle the poor and racial minorities. You saw some of this reaction during your visit to a black church in South Carolina. You saw some of this during your visit to a black church in South Carolina, where a woman asked you why you refer to President Obama as the food stamp president. It sounds as if you are seeking to belittle people.
Well, first of all, Juan, the fact is that more people have been put on food stamps by Barack Obama than any president in American history. I know among the politically correct, you're not supposed to use facts that are uncomfortable.
Anytime Gingrich needed a boost in the polls, he'd go back to this well. Gingrich was never a doctrinaire conservative, which, believe it or not, was actually in style back in those days, but he was popular within the conservative movement because he spat venom at the media. Obviously, it wasn't enough to win him the nomination, but in some ways, he was the forerunner to Trump. One of the biggest reasons why Donald Trump gained so much popularity amongst conservatives is because he broke their cultural rules without apology, and he got away with it. He was the champion that so many people on the right were waiting for. Whatever else is true about Trump, his victory did own the libs, which is exactly what so many wished for. No one can ever take that away from him. For a brief period of time, it was the left that was on the outside looking in.
Donald J. Trump is now President of the United States. President Obama.
For a brief period of time, they didn't have nearly the cultural power they used to, because Donald Trump sucked all the energy and attention out of the room. In other words, he was exactly the fighter so many conservatives always wanted. Again, this video is not meant to be exhaustive. In 2 election cycles in a row, tens of millions of people voted for Trump. Obviously, there's more than one reason why all these people decided to cast their ballots the way they did. And like I said earlier, this video is meant to be descriptive, not proscriptive. I routinely criticize the left on this channel, which works out nicely because I used to be on the left. Granted, things have changed on that side of the spectrum, but I still have a good idea of what's going on and where those people are coming from. I have never been a conservative, however, nor for that matter a Trump supporter, but I try very hard to understand the people I disagree with. Based on what I've seen, it seems to me that cultural issues matter more now to conservatives than policy or anything else. And this was a key reason why Donald Trump resonated with the right. Donald Trump is the culture war president.